Hello students, welcome to Shri Classes. We'll continue with lecture number 2, How do organisms reproduce, chapter number 8. In this, we'll discuss sexual reproduction in plants and human beings. This is the second part, and after this there is only one section left, that is called reproductive health. Okay, so let's go through this one. Before we understand, something about the cell division needs to be known to us, because the cell division, that is division of one parent cell into daughter cells, that is, there are two types in that. The cells of the reproductive systems or the reproductive organs will divide by means of meiosis, whereas non-reproductive tissues or the cells of non-reproductive organs will divide by a process called mitosis. So this you have studied already in 9th standard, and it is a small recap. So let us see the two types of cell division, because this is very important. Remember, I am going to relate the cell division with respect to the number of chromosomes. That is more important for you rather than to understand the cell division process. We are interested to know the number of chromosomes, that is more important. So what is cell division? The process by which new cells are made or new cells are formed is called a cell division. Mainly there are two types, mitosis and meiosis. What is mitosis? Here you can see the picture here. This is taken from the 9th standard book. One parent cell, which can also be called as a mother cell, basically. One parent cell will divide into two daughter cells. If you look at the number of chromosomes in this process, 4 chromosomes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Number of chromosomes in parent cell and number of chromosomes in daughter cells remain same. This cell division is observed in the entire body structure. Whether it is a plant or animal, this kind of cell division is to happen in the entire body except the reproductive organs, because there the cell division is different, such as testes and ovaries. There the cell division is totally different than compared to the liver, hands, or for that matter any organ. So mitosis cell division here, cell division for growth and repair of tissues in organisms is done by a process called mitosis, in which cell divides into two daughter cells and will have the same number of chromosomes as that of the mother cell. So cell division for growth and repair tissues in the organisms means here we are referring to those tissues which are non-reproductive tissues or non-reproductive organs, you can say. And why cell division is required? That also a very small one sentence is there somewhere. We'll see here. New cells are formed in organisms in order to grow. The body requires to be grown, and therefore cell division is definitely required because it should multiply. To replace the old, worn out or the dead cells, and of course to injured cells, and to form gametes, which are sex cells, which are also called germ cells, to form these which are required for production. So in order to achieve all these objectives, the cell division is required. We saw the mitosis, that takes place, the cell division takes place by mitosis in non-reproductive tissues, different body parts, you can say. Hope it is clear. Number of chromosomes in daughter cells is same as that of the parent cell, remember. Next, meiosis. Meiosis is a process of cell division that takes place in reproductive tissues or reproductive organs. Reproductive organs produce germ cells, sperms in case of males, eggs or ova you can say in case of females. So those are termed as gametes. So the division of the cell in gametes is by a process called meiosis. Remember that. Look at the diagram here. One mother cell will split into 4 daughter cells. Important. Unlike mitosis, where 2 daughter cells were formed from a mother cell, here one parent cell will divide into 4 daughter cells. Check the number of chromosomes here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Every daughter cell has got half the number of chromosomes as that of the parent cell. So why I am referring to the number of chromosomes here? The chromosomes in the human body, if you look at, the total number of chromosomes in a cell present are 23 pairs or 46 numbers. You understood? But that is in all the cells except the germ cells. The number of chromosomes present in a sperm is 23 numbers. Similarly, in eggs also, the number of chromosomes present is 23 numbers. If both these two mate together to form a zygote, in that case, the original number of 46 chromosomes will get restored, and thereby that leads to a particular body design. That means the chromosome balancing took place. So that is what we are looking at sexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, both the parents are involved, the mother and the father. So in that case, the egg as well as sperm, when they combine together, the total number of chromosomes to be restored. In order to restore that one to a 46 numbers, half of the chromosomes must be present in sperm and half of the chromosomes should be present in egg. So fusion of both together will lead to formation of a zygote, which is a unicellular or one cell, and that zygote contains 46 number of chromosomes. That is how the number of chromosomes are restored. When the zygote divides further, each cell will have once again 46 numbers, that is 23 plus 23, that is 23 pairs will be there. So zygote continuously divides to form the embryo there. So that is the reason a small introduction about the cell division, mitosis and meiosis, and especially the germ cells. You can find the number of chromosomes will be present in the germ cells are half the number of chromosomes that are present in the parent cell. That is what it is important to understand. Okay, this is not the end over here. This was the lecture for 9th standard, and therefore this is the last topic. Therefore I have mentioned end here, but this is the beginning for sexual reproduction in the 10th standard chapter. Okay, let's start with this. So I think you are very clear with respect to the cell division process. We are interested only in meiosis, where one mother cell divides into daughter cells, 4 numbers, okay, and the number of chromosomes will be half the number of chromosomes present in the parent cell. With this, let us proceed with what is the definition of sexual reproduction. The sexual mode of reproduction involves combining DNA from 2 different individuals, male and female, which we call mother and a father, or both the parents we can also say, during reproduction. So it involves 2 individuals, one should be a male and one should be a female during the reproduction. That is one thing. Couple of terminologies we need to understand. Male gametes, female gametes, what is fertilization, what is zygote, what is embryo. These are the few basic terminologies. Male gametes are nothing but sex cells. Male gamete means male germ cell or a male sex cell. What is the nature of that? Generally these are smaller and motile in nature. The meaning of motile means male germ cells will be under motion, they will be moving. Female gametes or female germ cells, which are eggs or ovum we can also call. These are non-motile first of all. Those are larger in size comparatively, and they store food because that food is required for the further nutrition and all. So male gametes, female gametes, which are also called germ cells, and the nature you have understood. What is fertilization? Process of fusion of male and female gametes to form zygote is called fertilization. What is a zygote in that case? Zygote is a result of fertilization. In simple terms, it is a fertilized egg. Then comes the embryo. The zygote, remember, it is a one cell, and it continuously divides to form a mass, and that mass is called embryo. And also you can say embryo is the status between the zygote and the newly formed offspring. You understand? So embryo is the in-between stage between the zygote and newly formed offspring. So these are the terminologies which we have to understand. Let us have a look at first one. See, under the sexual reproduction, we will have a look at sexual reproduction in flowering plants. We will study first that, and then we will go for the human beings. So there are three parts in understanding the sexual reproduction in flowering plants. In flowering plants means all these are called angiosperms. Only that is there for our portion as a part of the syllabus, and we are studying only that one. So sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Three parts are, let us understand the reproductive parts of the flower. What is pollination? What is fertilization? And also, after fertilization, what happens to the flower? One question generally appears. So here, sexual reproduction in flowering plants, reproductive parts of the flower. This is the diagram taken from your textbook. Let us understand the different parts over here. So mainly sepals at the bottom of the flower, sepals, petals which are colorful in order to attract the insects such as bees and all, petals. Then this is most important part. This is called stamen, and this is called pistil. Stamen and pistil. Stamen consists of two parts, filament and anther. This is the filament and this is the anther, and stamen is the male reproductive part of the flower. Similarly, this center part over here, you can see this center part over here, this entire structure is called pistil or also called carpel, and this is the female reproductive organ or part of the flower. This female reproductive part of the flower can be classified into three main parts. This bigger portion over here, this is called ovary, which contains inside the eggs, which are also called ovules. This is the bulge portion. This part, the middle part, is called style. This top part is called a stigma, and stigma is generally sticky in nature. So these are the components of the flower or the male and female reproductive parts of the flower. Let us see one more thing important here is stamen, male reproductive part stamen. It consists of anther and filament. As I said, this is a filament and this is the anther. This anther here, anther contains pollen sacs. Pollen sacs means, generally sacs refers to small vesicles or in simple terms small bags. Okay, so anther contains pollen sacs. This anther contains pollen sacs, and this pollen sacs will produce pollen grains. pollen grains are male gametes. Similarly, here in the female reproductive part, stigma, style, ovary are the three main parts, and ovary contains the ovules. Let us understand for the timing only this one. In our next slide, we will try to describe these parts. We will try to describe a little bit, the way it is described in your textbook. I hope you have understood mainly the male and female reproductive parts of the flowers. Okay, and here there are two important points have been given. The plants, there are two types of plants. One is unisexual plant and bisexual plant. Unisexual plants examples are papaya and watermelon. The beauty of this is the flowers contain either stamen or pistil or a carpel, either a male reproductive part or a female reproductive part, but not both. And therefore, examples of unisexual plants are papaya and watermelon. Bisexual plants, the flowers of bisexual plants will have both male and female reproductive parts, that is both stamen and carpel. Examples, the best examples to give is mustard and hibiscus. These are the things. Let's go to the next slide. Here, as I said, a little description is required. Let's see here. Same diagram. Stamen is the male reproductive part and it produces pollen grains that are yellowish in color. Remember, pollen grains are produced by pollen sacs, where anther contains the pollen sacs that produce pollen grains, and pollen grains are male gametes. That is one part. You have already understood this is a filament, this is the anther. Anther contains pollen sacs. Pollen sacs will produce pollen grains. What is the color? Those are yellowish in color. Here, this is the female reproductive part. A small description according to your textbook. Carpel or pistil or carpel, this is the female reproductive part, okay, is present in the center of the flower and is the female reproductive part. Yes, this carpel is present in the center of the flower and it is female reproductive part of the flower. The swollen bottom part is the ovary. Yes, we have understood. The swollen bottom part is the ovary that contains eggs or ovules. The middle elongated part is style. This is the middle elongated part and this is style. And the terminal part, this part which is sticky in nature, is called stigma. So this is as per the description given in your textbook. Clear? I hope you have understood these parts. Let's go to, so the first part we have understood the reproductive parts of the flower. Next, let us see. This is pollination. What is pollination? The definition of pollination, here it is, transfer of pollen grains, nothing but male gametes. The transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of a flower is called pollination. That means male gametes are to be transferred to the stigma, which is the sticky portion. That is a female reproductive part. So the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the flower is called pollination, and it can be carried out by wind, water or insects, that you know already. There are two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination, and it is important to understand. Many times you get questions on the what is pollination and the types. Self-pollination, here the diagram gives very interesting, if you look at the diagram, it is very clear. This part is a self-pollination and this is a cross-pollination. Let's understand what exactly here. One plant and there are two flowers here. Okay, now we are looking at self-pollination. This is here anther and this is stigma. Transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma in the same flower is called self-pollination. Also, transfer of pollen grains from one flower of the plant to the another flower of the same plant and to the stigma of that flower is also called self-pollination. Means transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the same flower or from anther to the stigma of the flower of the same plant is termed as self-pollination. Is this definition very clear for all of you? Now, what about cross-pollination? Transfer of pollen grains from one flower of one plant to the stigma of another flower of totally another plant, and that is called cross-pollination. How these are carried by? In both the cases, wind, water or insects generally are responsible for transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma. Okay, so self-pollination and cross-pollination you have understood. Now let's go to the next part here. Yeah, fertilization. Third part is fertilization. How did we define fertilization? The fusion of male and female gametes to form the zygote is called a fertilization. Let's see here. After the pollen grain is transferred to the stigma, see here in flowering plants it is better to understand in detail all these things. After the pollen grain is transferred to the stigma, it produces a pollen tube which passes through the style and enters the ovary and also ovule. In the ovule, the male germ cell fuses with the female germ cell to form a zygote, and this process is called fertilization. I don't know whether you have understood. So let us take the help of the diagram now, which is important. See, this is a pollen grain which is a male gamete, and that pollen grain male gamete is yellowish in color. Once that is transferred to the stigma, which is sticky part, the pollination has taken place. This is what we say, pollination has taken place. So once this is transferred, the pollen grain sits on the stigma, a pollen tube is developed. This is a pollen tube, and this pollen tube, where it is passing through? It is passing through this tube here. What is this middle portion? It is called style. So this pollen tube is passing through the style and then entering into the ovary and also into the ovule, where entering into the ovary and also into the ovules. This pollen grain being a male gamete then comes over here. You can see here male germ cell here, this small dot, through this pollen tube. Before that, why there is a development of pollen tube? You have studied under tropisms, chemotropism. What is chemotropism? The growth of part of the plant by towards the chemical stimulus is called chemotropism. Here in this ovary, or in the, you can say in the ovary, there is a glucose present, which is a sweet substance, because of which this pollen tube starts developing and moves towards the glucose, and therefore the growth of a pollen tube from the pollen grain at the top of the stigma into the ovary through style is an example for chemotropism. Clear? That's one thing. So once this pollen tube that establishes the bridge between the anther and this ovules inside the ovary, the male germ cell will pass through that, enters into the ovule and mates the ovule or mates the egg here. The moment this male germ cell meets with the female germ cell, which is called an egg, fertilization takes place, and this is called a fertilized egg. What happens after fertilization? So what happens after fertilization is a big question, and generally there appears one question appears for that. Okay, so my request would be just study this and make a small note of this, and then we'll go to the next slide. I hope till this point it is very clear, till this fertilization. Okay, let's go to the next slide. What happens after fertilization? Let us read this and try to comprehend. After fertilization, the zygote divides several times and forms the embryo. Here, there is a fertilized egg. Eggs are there here. Once they mate with the male germ cell, a zygote is formed, and that zygote divides many times to form an embryo. And embryo which then develops into a seed. And the ovary, this part, can you see this outside part? This ovary develops into fruit. So the ovules, in general, the ovules are nothing but eggs. The eggs are getting converted into seeds, and the ovary becomes the fruit. When that will happen? Only after fertilization and zygote formation takes place. So the fertilized egg over here, which is called the zygote, that continuously divides to form an embryo, and that embryo develops into seed, and the outer portion, ovary, develops into fruit. What happens to the petals, sepals, etc.? That's the next point. Meanwhile, the petals, sepals, stamen, style and stigma, all rest of the parts, they shrivel, means wrinkle or contract and fall off. Got it? Second, okay, fine. Up to this, that is the thing which happens after the fertilization. Now, this seed, it contains a future plant. Seed, when it becomes seedling, whenever it comes into contact with moist soil, when the conditions are favorable, the seed will get converted into seedling. What is seedling? You must know very clearly what is seedling. Seedling is a seed that just is sprouted, or just sprouted seed is called a seedling. आपको समझ में आ रहा है the difference between seed and seedling? So a seedling is also a seed but has just sprouted, meaning just sprouted seed is called a seedling, and that contains future baby plant, that contains future plant, you can say, or it itself can be termed as a baby plant, and that contains future plant. So here this is the okay, what is germination? Conversion of seed into seedling under appropriate conditions is termed as germination. Okay, now once there is a germinated seed, sprouted seed, if it is opened and seen, you can see these are cotyledons, and this is a radicle. This radicle develops into root, and this is a plumule. This plumule develops into shoot or the stem. So plumule is referred to the future shoot, and radicle is referred to the future root, and these cotyledons store food. Those act as a storage devices for the food. Why? For the growth of this future plant. You got it? So the cotyledons provide sufficient food for the future plant. So important here, one thing to remember, how to remember this plumule and radicle, whether these are future shoots or future roots. R for radicle, R for future root. Simple. And therefore radicle is referred to the future root, and plumule is referred to the future shoot. So this is how a small diagram is given in your textbook and all. Okay, so we have understood the process of what is the process? Sexual reproduction in plants, right from transfer of pollen grains, that is pollination. We understood the parts of the flower, that is male and female reproductive parts, then pollination, then fertilization, Once the zygote is formed, post fertilization, what are the results? Post fertilization, all these sepals, petals, etc. will wilt off. The zygote will develop into embryo and then it will get converted into seed, whereas ovary develops into fruit. And the seeds, under suitable favorable conditions, they form seedlings, and seedlings contain the future plant basically. So seedling has three components, three parts: cotyledons, plumule, radicle. Radicle, R for radical, R for root, and therefore the radical is referred as future root and plumule is referred as future shoot. This is how the plants will get developed. Okay, if we compare this with vegetative propagation, where the vegetative propagation, it is if some of the plants have lost their ability to produce seeds, then how to propagate or how to grow those plants? Those plants can be grown by layering, grafting, cutting, but by means of a process of reproduction called vegetative propagation, isn't it? Unlike that, it is a sexual reproduction over here. Okay, fine. Students, will have to proceed to the next one. Reproduction in human beings. As it is, what is the, in humans use a sexual mode of reproduction where two parents are involved, male and female. Here the male gametes are specifically referred to as sperms and female gametes are referred to as eggs or ovum. The nature is similar, like the sperms are smaller and motile, and female gametes like eggs or ovum, which are also called female germ cells, are large, non-motile, and they store food. What is puberty? A small, couple of points have been given in your textbook, which you must know all. Puberty, it is that time period where sexual maturation takes place. It is the time period where sexual maturation takes place. What is the meaning of sexual maturation? It is that time period where the general body growth will be slowed down, but the growth of reproductive organs, reproductive tissues will take not only the growth, I can say the maturity of the reproductive tissues and reproductive organs takes place, and the reproductive organs would be able to produce hormones and sex cells. So the period during which sexual maturation takes place is called puberty. The rate of general body growth begins to slow down, whereas reproductive tissues begin to mature and be able to produce hormones or gametes. That is, you will get one question on this also. What is puberty? Something like that. And sexual maturation, from this paragraph also you can expect one question. All these points have been taken from your textbook. Very important here is, what is during puberty, what is common to both boys and girls and what is different to boys and girls. So my request would be, read all these points and make a proper note. I'll take a pause over here. Please read yourself and try to understand what is common to both boys and girls during sexual maturation and what is different for boys and girls during sexual maturation. Please read. Yes, students, we'll proceed further. Yeah. Next couple of parts are male reproductive system and female reproductive system. Most important is the diagram, understanding of the different parts of the organ system and what is or what are their functions. Very important to know. So let us try to it is a human male reproductive system, and let us try to understand the diagram first. Here you have this is a sac-like structure or a bag-like structure called scrotum, testis, which produces hormones, testosterone. Not only that, but sperms. So testis is the one organ that produces male gametes. Scrotum. So testis is there are pair of testes which are located inside a bag-like structure called scrotum. From the testis there is a tubular part. This is called vas deferens. This tubular part, vas deferens. On the way, seminal vesicle and prostate glands are the couple of organs that are present on this tube. Finally, this vas deferens here, this vas deferens and the urethra from the urinary bladder. This is a urinary bladder. This is the urethra. The tube that comes from the urinary bladder and the tube that comes from the testis will have a common passage called urethra. And finally, you have a muscular organ called penis, and here you have at the end there is a pore which is called genital pore for the discharge of either the sperms or for the discharge of the urine. So this is generally the different parts. And ureters over here, it is mentioned, ureters are connected to the bladder here, through which the urine comes from the kidneys basically. So what are the parts we have gone through? Let us study a little description about this one. The male reproductive system consists of a pair of testes which produces male reproductive cells called sperms, and also it produces hormones called testosterone. Testes are contained in a sac-like structures called scrotum. Next is location. Scrotum is located outside and below the abdominal cavity because spur formation requires a lower temperature than the normal body temperature. Below the abdomen, the temperature is slightly lower than the body temperature, and that favors the production of sperms. From each testis arises a tube called vas deferens. This tube is called vas deferens. It has an opening, deferens. It joins into urethra. Here this is urethra, and this vas deferens joins into urethra. The seminal vesicles and prostate glands, seminal vesicles here, seminal vesicles and the prostate glands, they have the functions also. Seminal vesicles and prostate glands produce fluids which provide nutrition and help in the movement of sperms. So you can say there are two functions from the secretions of the seminal vesicles and prostate gland. That means the fluids that are secreted by seminal vesicles and prostate glands provides a medium for the movement of sperms, and second, the fluids provide food for the sperms. What is food here? The nutrition for the sperms. And what is the shape of the sperm here? You can see it has got a head here and a tail portion. This tail portion helps for the movement. So this is about male reproductive system, and make sure that you are aware of all the parts over here and generally their function. Next we'll study once again here the same part, but some textbook description and few more information. We'll read and try to understand. That is much better rather than explanation, isn't it? It is better to read and comprehend it. The sperms formed are delivered through vas deferens, which unites with a tube coming from the urinary bladder. So testis produces the sperms, and these sperms would be able to move through this vas deferens and then end up into a urethra, which comes from the urinary bladder. The urethra thus forms a common passage for both sperms and urine. So this urethra is a common passage for the sperms that come from the vas deferens tube and also for the discharge of urine. Along the path of the vas deferens, glands like prostate and seminal vesicles and their secretions glands like the prostate and the seminal vesicles are present, and their secretions so that the sperms are now in a fluid which makes their transport easier, and this fluid also provides nutrition. As we said, prostate glands and seminal vesicles provide a fluid medium that helps in providing the nutrition, that is a food for the sperms, and also provides a medium for the movement of the sperms. And the sperms are tiny bodies that consist of mainly genetic material. The sperms are male gametes that contains 23 number of chromosomes, not 46, because these are the cells produced by reproductive tissues. Here it is testis. Okay, so the sperms are tiny bodies that consist of mainly genetic material and a long tail that helps to move towards the female germ cell. Okay, this is the information about male reproductive system. I hope you have understood. Next, female reproductive system. Let us have a look at the parts here. Pair of ovaries which produces eggs. Here on the top you can see this one and this one here. These are called oviduct or fallopian tubes. These are called fallopian tubes or oviduct. And these fallopian tubes enter into, here you can see, it is a thick bag-like structure called uterus. And finally, you have the uterus ends up with, this is cervix also sometimes they say, cervix, and finally uterus ends up with vagina. So these are the components. The female reproductive system consists of a pair of ovaries which produces the female reproductive cells called eggs, and of course the ovaries produce hormone estrogen and progesterone, isn't it? Okay, above the ovaries are fallopian tubes which are also called oviducts. The two ducts unite into an elastic bag. Of course, there is a thick, muscular, flexible, elastic bag. Uterus, bag-like structure called uterus. The uterus has an opening called vagina. Okay, this is the structure, and this is how the human egg looks like, almost spherical in shape. This is how we can. Let's see next. Here, so much of description is written, but this contains most important information so far as sexual reproduction in human beings is concerned. So you have to listen carefully and try to comprehend. Be alert now. This slide explains about fertilization, zygote formation, division of zygote into embryo and a fetus. Got it? And finally till the delivery of a baby. So this is how this part covers. Let us read it and try to comprehend. Very important. One egg is produced every month by one of the ovaries. The egg is carried from the ovary to the womb, which is nothing but uterus, you can say, through a thin oviduct or a fallopian tube. So egg is transferred from ovary to the uterus through a fallopian tube. The two oviducts unite into an elastic bag-like structure known as uterus. So how do you describe uterus? It is an elastic bag-like structure into which both the oviducts or the fallopian tubes open into. The uterus opens into the vagina through the cervix. Next, the sperms enter through the vaginal passage during sexual intercourse and travel upwards and reach the oviduct, where they may fuse with the egg to form a fertilized egg called zygote. What is important in this process is fallopian tube is the site of fertilization. Dear students, please remember, fallopian tube or the oviduct is the site of fertilization. That means the sperms released through the vagina would be able to reach the fallopian tube, and the sperms would be able to mate with the eggs in the fallopian tube. So fertilization takes place in the fallopian tube to form a zygote. Then zygote starts dividing and form a ball of cells, a mass called embryo. Simply you can say zygote divides several times to form an embryo. The embryo is implanted in the lining of the uterus. See, important. The embryo comes down from the fallopian tube, enters into the uterus, and on the walls of the uterus it will get implanted. So the embryo gets implanted in the linings of the uterus, on the walls of the uterus, where they continue to grow and develop organs to become a fetus. Understood? Next, the lining of the uterus. See what happens after fertilization. A small paragraph is given. The lining of the uterus thickens and it becomes spongy and soft in order to support the fertilized egg, that is embryo, in order to support the embryo. So the lining of the uterus thickens and it is richly supplied with blood to nourish the growing embryo. That means the embryo should get its food from the blood itself, mother's blood, and therefore, see here, important this paragraph to understand. The embryo gets nutrition from the mother's blood with the help of a special tissue called placenta. Now, with respect to placenta, every time there is a question, describe the structure of placenta. What is that? Describe the structure of placenta. See here, this paragraph you may have to read several times and try to understand what is the structure of placenta and how placenta would be able to provide nourishment or nutrition to the fetus, and how the placenta would be able to remove the waste substances from the fetus back into the mother's blood. That is very important. So let's see here. Placenta, it is a disc-like structure. It is a disc-like structure which is embedded in the uterus wall or uterine wall. It contains villi, finger-like projections on the embryo side, and on the mother's side, blood-filled space. What is placenta? It is a disc-like structure embedded on the walls of the uterus, containing finger-like projections on the embryo side and blood-filled space on the mother's side. Okay? Blood spaces which surround the villi. This provides the blood which is there on the other side of the placenta provides, not that, the villi, basically the placenta or the villi present on the placenta provides large surface area for the absorption and transport of glucose and oxygen from mother to the embryo and back and also to transport waste substances from embryo to mother's blood. So a simple thing, what is that is the food is supplied to the embryo from the mother's blood through a placenta which has got villi, finger-like projections, that increases the surface area for the absorption and transportation of glucose and oxygen, and also to remove the waste substances from the embryo and transport back into the mother's blood. So important is, ये जो बहुत important है, describe the structure of and important significance of placenta is what generally a question comes. Okay, that's fine. So I hope you have understood. Next is, the development of the child inside the mother's body takes approximately 9 months. That means the embryo gets developed into a fetus, and the fetus, it remains in the mother's body approximately for 9 months, and then the child is born as a result of rhythmic contractions of the muscles in the uterus. So this is how the textbook describes about the fertilization, zygote formation, embryo, how the embryo gets the nutrition from placenta, what is its structure, and how the fetus is formed. Fetus is a small baby having all the features, and how this fetus grows into a further child, and how it is folded for 9 months inside the uterus, and then due to contractions, muscles contractions of the uterus, the child is born after 9 months. This is the process of, so this describes in general right from fertilization to the delivery of a baby. Okay, so I hope you have understood this. Next here you have some diagrams and all, which you can have a look at that. Okay, this is how the diagram looks like, stages of early development and all. Okay, can have a note of this. Yeah, next is what happens when the egg is not fertilized. Important, just a moment, no disturbance. What happens when the egg is not fertilized? This is a part of menstruation. So what is menstruation we'll study. That means whenever the egg is not fertilized, every time it is not necessary that every month whenever one egg is released, it may not get fertilized. In that case, what happens to unfertilized egg? That is what we have to understand here. So that is nothing but menstruation. The ovary produces one egg and the uterus prepares to receive the fertilized egg. Uterus gets prepared itself every time whenever the egg is released. Okay, its walls become thick and spongy. The walls of the uterus becomes thick and spongy with blood vessels for nourishing the embryo. If fertilization does not take place, then the uterus wall breaks slowly and comes out of the vagina as a blood and mucus. This cycle takes place once every month and is called a menstruation. So it is important to, you may get one question also, what is menstruation and all. So what happens if the egg is not fertilized? That could be an indirect question also. So read once again and note down. So dear students, we have completed today sexual reproduction in flowering plants, sexual reproduction in human beings. We have understood, we completed these two topics. So in our next lecture, in the next class, let us have a look at the last section, that is reproductive health. And generally one question also appears from reproductive health. So note down all the key points, and the diagrams also need to be practiced, and read several times to understand this one. It is not a difficult chapter, relatively easier chapter. So let us end the lecture over here. Make good notes out of it, and see you in the next lecture with the last section. Thank you for watching.